Hello, everyone. This is Adam Chekhov, head of the AYD's Commerce, Labor, and Technology, and Finance Caucus. Here today with Virginia Diamond from Nova Labor and the head of the Coalition to Repeal Right to Work to talk about labor and the coronavirus. First, Ginny, how are you doing?
Great. Thank you so much. Good to see you, Adam, and thanks.
Good to see you too.
All Young Dems for inviting me to this event. Appreciate it.
Great to have you. So I guess just my first question is, I read in the American Prospects Symposium on Labor and the Coronavirus that really since the coronavirus really started hitting the United States in like mid to late March, there have been around like 150 strikes and work stoppages. Many of these have hit like big name companies like Amazon, Whole Foods, Target, and Instacart. Have there been like any similar actions or strikes taken here in either like in Northern Virginia or Virginia as a whole? I know like there was recently a strike at like a meat plant. I think it was like south to the west of here, but just how's at least the coronavirus affected labor in Virginia?
You're right, Adam. There has been a real uptick in worker activism and militancy as a result of this terrible pandemic. It's understandable that this is happening because, workers have been very vulnerable and very exploited for a long time. So they have always faced the insecurity of not getting enough pay to save any money, of not having completely safe working conditions, not having accessible health care. And now with the pandemic, they're going into situations that are not only difficult for their lives, but actually threatening their lives. So workers that are on the front lines are most concerned about access to personal protective equipment that's not available, and issues of just unsafe working conditions is what's generating a lot of that. I will say though that working class militancy has been growing even prior to the pandemic. Just you ask about Northern Virginia. There's been an enormous amount of activism and organizing that's been taking place over the past couple of years. We had an 84-day strike of bus drivers in Fairfax County, and another strike by 600 Fairfax County connector workers. There were the Metro bus workers. Bus drivers in Alexandria at Dash organized a union. There's been a lot of militancy by building service workers, airport workers, and so on. So this pandemic, I think, is just really bringing to everybody's attention the fact that the economy is absolutely not working for the working class.
Sounds like it's added fuel to an already burning fire.
Well put.
Oh, yeah. No, it has like this outpouring of community support for care workers and frontline workers been of any assistance to workers who are striking? Like, has there been widespread community support for these actions?
It's a great question. I think there's general public sympathy for healthcare workers, grocery workers, delivery, et cetera, postal workers. And so there's a sense of sympathy. And I think community support is growing for workers, and especially when they want to unionize. And that's the most important thing is that, all of these threats, all these vulnerabilities, all this exploitation, it's best addressed when workers have representation. So for example, workers who belong to UFCW Local 400 are able to advocate much more strongly for protective equipment and for hazard pay and for testing because they have the support of a union. Workers who don't have unions are really, really in big trouble here, and everybody really needs to join a union. I think that's my message for you all tonight.
Absolutely. So many of the workers who are taking action to ban safety, like essential safety measures and hazard pay, are workers in the so-called gig economy, like especially like for instance like Instacart. A lot of like Instacart drivers are they technically can't join a union because they're independent contractors. Obviously that's a misclassification in many cases, but like do you potentially see like any new models for like organizing gig workers or trying to like like make inroads to the labor movement within the gig economy emerging from these actions and from this crisis? That seems to be like a new frontier for labor.
I just really think that it's important for us to disavow and demystify this whole concept that there's such a special thing as a gig worker who's not really a real worker, not a regular worker. It's just not true. You know, you might call someone a gig worker because they are truly totally screwed and don't have any benefits and, you know, hardly, you know, any rights on the job. But, you know, calling them an independent contractor is misclassification. And, you know, maybe the federal, you know, the Republicans and the Labor Board and the Department of Labor may want to call them that, but they're not. They're workers. They're employees. Absolutely. They have the right to form a union, and they should form a union. And that means, you know, Uber drivers, Lyft drivers, and Instacart workers, they all should organize unions, and they should be bargaining with these companies. And to say that there's some kind of special species of gig workers in a gig economy, it just means they're getting screwed more so than many other workers. And just to point out that, you know, if you look at, for example, in the arts, cultural, entertainment industry, actors, SAG-AFTRA, IATSE, Writers Guild, I mean, these are all gig workers who belong to very strong unions in an industry that's heavily unionized. So the concept that, you know, because you are not working in a permanent factory, that somehow you're not eligible to be joining with your coworkers and gaining better pay, benefits, and job security and a voice on the job. It's just not true. I'll just point out, in terms of misclassification, it's also very, very prevalent on the construction industry, where especially with immigrant workers, that they are misclassified as independent contractors, which would really mean that they have to be owning their own business, which is not true, because they're just going in there and they're hanging up the drywall when they're told to, where they're told to. So I just think we should dispense with that nomenclature to a large degree. And unless you own your own business, then you're a worker. You need to organize a union with your coworkers, and you need to advocate for each other's benefits. Absolutely.
And fun fact, everyone watching, one of the most active and vocal presidents of the Screen Actors Guild was none other than Ronald Reagan himself.
So it can be a launching pad to greater victories.
So, yes, the Union Buster in Chief himself was once a union man. So, switching gears a little bit. So, Governor Northam recently announced that like phase 1 of reopening would begin on around like May 15th. At least, has like anyone from labor been consulted on this timeline? And do you think labor has enough resources or has like any plan to prepare for, you know, to maintain worker safety in like this first phase of reopening?
You know, as far as I know, and all I know is, you know, I saw the names on the task force for reopening that Governor Northam had appointed. I didn't see any union leader names on there. He really should have brought in our Virginia State AFL-CIO president, Doris Krause-Mays. She should have been at the table there. So that there would be input from the interests of workers. As far as preparing workers, I mean, we have, on the one hand, we have a lot of frontline workers who are working right now, who are really struggling with safety issues. A lot of our workers are also unemployed now. And yes, unions advocate for safety. That's certainly one of the main things that we do for workers. And so that'll definitely be an ongoing issue as we try to, you know, there's the profit motive, and then there's what we need to do for people. So it is going to be a struggle, but that's why every worker needs to be a member of a union, so they're not on their own fighting that fight.
Yeah, so speaking of Northam and labor, he also announced that, I think a few weeks ago, that public sector collective bargaining, which was passed by the General Assembly, would not be, I think was supposed to take effect, I think January 2021, but then he pushed it back to May 2021, because he thought that, collective bargaining could interfere in like the coronavirus response effort. Just to make a long story short, why is Northam wrong? And how can collective bargaining actually enhance or be beneficial to the coronavirus response?
Yeah, I mean, I can't even fathom, why he would put that off. So Virginia is one of just 4 states that has not had collective bargaining rights for public sector employees. At this session, we did not gain those rights for all workers in the state, but localities that choose to have collective bargaining are able to opt in and have a system where they, set up a program where they can talk to their firefighters, their teachers, their other county workers. And there's absolutely no reason why that had to be delayed until May 2021, when it's optional for the counties. And there are a number of counties, and I think, I'm sure Arlington, Fairfax, Alexandria, Loudoun, and Prince William will all be very interested in setting up these bargaining structures so that the workers on the front lines, the teachers, the county employees, the librarians, the firefighters will be able to talk, in a structured setting, and to have a voice, so they can say what they need to do their jobs and what they are gonna understand what the conditions are like as this pandemic continues, and they're the best able to talk about what the priorities should be and where the dangers are, where the hazards are. So to take away that right from them at this time, I think it's very, very wrong-headed and just an attack on workers. I don't agree with it at all.
Oh yeah. So it sounds like collective bargaining could be a way of actually allowing those who are most affected by the coronavirus to broadcast like what they need in order to fight it.
Exactly, and as there are budget issues because of the economic downturn, then they are able to articulate where priorities should be put so that we can most serve and best protect our community. So having those voices is really, really important now more than ever.
Absolutely. And so speaking at least of, like, I think you mentioned like what was passed by the General Assembly. So how do you think, just generally speaking, how do you think labor fared in the 2020 General Assembly session? Like, I know like there were some ups and downs, but overall, what do you think were sort of our greatest accomplishments and some things you'd like to work on in the next session?
Right. I think that there were definitely gains made for working people. One of the priorities of labor was to raise the minimum wage. $7.25 an hour is obviously not a livable wage at all. And so it was raised to $9.50. Originally, it was supposed to be effective in January. Now it'll be effective May 2021. $9.50. In where we live, it's also not a livable wage. So it's a very, very slow progression up to $15 in 2026. So yes, that's better than what we have, but it needs to be a lot better than that. The other thing that we gained, collective bargaining, is a big victory, although it is delayed. We did gain some more tools that workers can use in attacking wage theft, misclassification, payroll fraud, the right to sue, other procurement reforms, which will help a lot of workers, driver's licenses for all, which is important for our immigrant community, and some important workers' comp reforms, such as reforming the cancer presumption and PTSD for first responders. Those are all really important. What we didn't get, which was a very big disappointment, was we did not get the repeal of right to work. And all in all, as we come out of this session, when we went into it with Virginia being 51 out of 51 states in the district in terms of worker rights, and we came out of it 51 also. So we have a ways to go, but that was a really a big start, and we're going to continue to push it. We want to repeal the right to work law because we want to give workers the right to have unions, to organize, and that's the only way we're going to restore an income that was livable and that can raise people up out of poverty into the middle class. The biggest problem that's being exposed right now is the fact that there's this incredible concentration of wealth, and it grew greater after the last Great Recession, and it's increasing now as well, so that a very small handful of people control the majority of wealth in our country. Your generation. Oops, sorry.
No worries.
Yeah, your generation, you have not only are you saddled with student debt, we don't have a functioning healthcare system that provides affordable, accessible healthcare at all. It's tied to people's jobs, and then when they lose their jobs, it's gone, even if it's in the middle of a pandemic. You don't have good wages, and the main thing is that the decline of unions is correlated to the growth in income inequality. You guys are all going to have to organize your workplaces. We're going to have to organize unions in order to have the power back to the working class.
Absolutely. Now, you mentioned the last economic recession. As I recall, and I'm still old enough to remember, but when, in 08 and 09, people were saying this would just be like the Great Depression. This would be, labor's great moment for, labor law reform. You're going to get the Employee Free Choice Act. But many of those hopes just didn't really come to pass. And now, as we enter another economic downturn, really the second or third of my lifetime, and now with another economic downturn, we have another chance for labor law reform and other progressive reforms. What do you think were the major mistakes that labor and progressives made back in 2009, and what lessons does that hold for how we can succeed where we previously failed in 2021?
Okay, I guess that's a great way to put it. And I guess the way that I would raise this question is, is the Democratic Party going to decide that they want to have strong unions in the country, or are they going to decide that that's not an element of their central agenda? And just to go back, as we said, unions reached their peak in the 1950s, and there's been a decline in unionization rates since then. We were at 34% back then. Now, 6% of the private sector. Of course, we knew this was a problem under Jimmy Carter. We had a Democratic Congress and we had a Democratic president, and we tried to get labor law reform so that workers would be protected when they try to unionize, and that failed. Then we tried again under Bill Clinton when we had a Democratic president and a Democratic Congress to get labor law reform, and it failed then too. We tried again under Obama when we had a Democratic Congress and Democratic president, and we also did not get those protections. And so what it really comes down to is I'm not sure we did anything wrong, except maybe embedding with the wrong party. I don't know. The issue was that as a structural matter, the Democratic Party did not decide that having strong unions was essential to their mission. And I think that what they need to decide now is whether there can actually ever be a middle class in this society if they don't come up with some very fundamental, dramatic changes that allow workers to organize without getting fired, without getting threatened, and without all this employer resistance that makes it almost impossible to organize. You have to really be heroic.
Oh, yeah. Also, I remember Lee Carter saying that union members tend to disproportionately vote Democratic. So when he was saying what really amazes me about why some Democrats are standing in the way of repealing right to work is he said, quote, "I can't believe how much they like losing." But
yeah, I mean, I do think that to the extent that the Democratic Party wants to be a corporate party with liberal social issues as their central core value, as opposed to caring about economic populism, economic justice for the working class, they don't identify with the working class, then they're not going to get workers' votes.
So just to touch back to an earlier subject you mentioned, you said a lot of unions were have seen their members laid off, and as a result, a lot of unions are running short on money and resources in order to keep serving their members. I think it was Unite Here lost over 90% of their members, or at least 90% of their members were laid off. So what are unions doing in the meantime to try to keep themselves afloat in this upsurge in unemployment?
I think we're still organizing. We're still doing whatever we can. I mean, when you raise the issue of Unite Here, specifically Unite Here Local 23 is still organizing their workers. And in fact, there's a huge rent strike campaign that's been going on in Virginia, Alexandria, the center of it being the Southern Towers. Many of those workers are members of either Unite Here Local 23 or SEIU 32BJ, and they are getting support from the union with their organizing for their rent strike. So we're just going to hope that we can, survive and get people back to work, because those people they can't pay rent because they don't have any money, and they don't have any savings, and they don't have any health care. And this is exposing that our economy really is not working, and it hasn't been working for a very long time.
Mm-hmm. And as you said before, like this has really exposed like the structural failures of our economic system. So if if we, let's say, are able to, let's say if we play our cards right strategically, and we are able to once again get like Democrats in control of the executive and legislative branches, like what kinds of reforms, whether it's like economic or labor law reform, do you think we can get? Like what do you think would be like labor's first priority? Would it be like, sick pay? Would it be changing passing card check or the PRO Act?
I think the number one priority has to be the PRO Act.
Mm-hmm.
Because what the PRO Act is it's the protecting the right to organize. The whole, it's very important to have minimum wage increases, to get paid sick leave, to get, obviously we need Medicare for all. We need these types of fundamental changes. But the reason why the working class is not seeing policies that prioritize their needs is because they don't have the power of a unified voice in unions. And so the PRO Act, which gets rid of all the right to work laws, which penalizes companies that threaten workers who are organizing, that will open up the ability of workers to join together, to have the right to organize unions. What that's going to do is create a counter force against corporate Wall Street power, which is now dominating really both parties and the entire country. So I would say that's got to be number one. It's power for the working class through the ability to form unions and have a voice, and then we can talk about all the other ways that we want to improve society.
Oh yeah, no. Like if you look at all countries with large and extensive welfare states, one of the reasons they were able to achieve that is because they had stronger and very militant unions. So if you ever want to, bridge that gap here, yeah.
Strong unions will bring about benefits for all workers, whether they're in unions or not. And we'll just put in a little poke to our senators, Senator Kaine and Senator Warner, neither of whom have signed on to the PRO Act. All of our congressional representatives in Northern Virginia have, and we appreciate that. But I do think that our leading Democratic elected officials should do whatever they can to strengthen the ability of workers to form unions. And that shouldn't really be controversial as far as I'm concerned. If the Democratic Party really wants to be a strong supporter of the working class.
Absolutely. So bringing things closer to home, I was talking with Keith Willis from the Arlington Democrats Labor Caucus, and he was giving me an update on the struggle with Did Lake, and he said that a lot of their workers are still struggling. And in addition to everything they've gone through in the past 2 years, they're struggling to even get like basic PPE and training. So, first, like for anyone who's unfamiliar with the situation, could you explain what's going on with Did Lake? I feel it's important to really bring them up because it's a truly inspirational story, as well as one that combines, at least on management side, cartoonish supervillainy with just union busting, and what have been their latest struggles with the coronavirus? Like, have they been able to get PPE or?
Adam, thank you so much for bringing this up. I really appreciate it because I think we must always talk about the Did Lake workers. The Did Lake is a quote unquote nonprofit corporation that gets government contracts to provide custodial service to government buildings. And they get their grants under something called the Ability One program, which requires them to hire 75% of their workforce as having disabilities. So Did Lake is an organization that pretends to be very, supportive and paternalistic, and they love their disabled workers. However, when a group at the Arlington National Guard of disabled workers decided that they wanted to organize a union because they noticed that they were being paid less than the union workers. And these are workers who are working, cleaning bathrooms, cleaning floors, doing janitorial work, in some cases for 10, 15, 20 years, doing regular janitorial work. The Did Lake management took the position that their disabled workers should not have the right to have a union, that they shouldn't have the backing of a union, that they'll take good care of them just like they are, and they pay them less. And of course, what they did when they petitioned for a union election, they actually threatened the workers. And the labor board found that, by threatening the workers that they would be fired, or they would lose their jobs and lose their benefits if they organized. So it was only the Trump labor board that eventually overturned their election and took away their union. So they're still fighting, but right now, we are in touch with them, and unfortunately, because they don't have a union, they are afraid to ask for more protection. They're not getting the training that they need. Some of them are deaf. They don't really feel that they have the protective equipment that they need. And I just want to point out that Melwood is another nonprofit company that also participates in Ability One. They recognize unions. They respect the right of their workers to have unions. They don't have this paternalistic, contemptuous attitude towards their workforce. So, I really would hope that, our government buildings would look at Melwood when they're awarding those contracts. That's the way I feel about it. It's disgusting, and everybody should keep in mind that Did Lake is phony baloney as far as caring about disabled workers.
No, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think at one point, when they were arguing in front of the NLRB, Did Lake claim that, the National Labor Relations Act says that, if you're in a rehabilitative relationship with your employees, they can't unionize. And I think that was based on what I've read, that was talking about prison labor, which is another issue in and of itself. They said, we're in a rehabilitative relationship with our employees, therefore, because they're disabled, disabled workers don't have the right to organize.
It's disgusting. And these are people who are working alongside non-disabled custodians. And they deserve this the same dignity and respect and rights, and they deserve the same pay and benefits as any worker without a disability. It's absolutely reprehensible and disgusting that they took that position.
I thought I'd seen it all with union busting. It's this is a new low.
It is that's why I'm glad you brought it up, because it's terrible, and I hope that the community does continue to rise up and support those people.
Okay, and as for some questions that have been submitted, I'm actually going to combine two of them, I think. So you talked about the Democratic Party being a strong voice, becoming a stronger voice for the working class. So for our members here in AYD, what can we do to help the labor movement at the local, state, or federal level, and how can we work to elevate the voices of the working class to make them, to help them, have a stronger presence within the Democratic Party? What can we do?
Thank you so much for that question, and it's really, really important. Now whenever workers do try to organize and they are facing employer resistance, repression, threats, firings, the only thing that will allow the workers to prevail is when people in the community, whether they're Democratic Party members, community groups, church groups, civil rights groups, immigrant rights groups, when they come together and pressure employers to respect their workers, that makes all the difference. I'll give you an example. When the bus drivers in Alexandria were trying to organize, the company hired, which actually a city-owned company, hired a union buster. And they were going to just threaten them and try to divide the immigrant workers from the regular workforce. And so what happened was that the newly elected Democratic Party city council members, the Democratic committee, Congressman Beyer, delegates like Delegate Mark Levine, all got on top of the company and said, fire that union buster. And then they actually, I remember Mo Seifeldine and others, including Michelle Reif and Mark Levine, walked into the garage, walked around to the workers and shook their hands and said, congratulations, you're going to have a union. This is great. We support you. And the union buster was kicked out, sent back to California. And I think that with all of the activity going on, there's just so much that young Democrats can do to help locally. And I think that's the most important thing, is to actually help in local struggles. For example, here where we are in Arlington, the stagehands have filed for a union election at Signature Theater, and a number of the Democrats, on the board, as well as the school board and the Democratic committee, have written to Signature Management and said, we fully expect you to be welcoming the union with open arms and collaborating and being a partner with them, and we support them and really, really need your help in supporting worker struggles right in your own communities. And anyone that wants to come to NOVA labor meetings, come to our locality labor caucus meetings, please come along. Anybody that wants help in organizing, please stay in touch. And we really, really need your help and your support. It's critical.
Oh, yeah, no. And I think one thing I'd like to point out is that whenever there's usually in many cases, whenever there's a major attempt to try to unionize, Republican politicians will almost always make a public statement or show up on behalf of management or the union busters. It's like you had Nikki Haley when Boeing workers are trying to organize in South Carolina. So, I think really, as one of my friends in the labor movement told me at one point, said that, look, before we get to many of the technocratic fixes, the first thing we need to do is to actually show up.
Yeah. So. Yeah. If Democrats love unions as much as Republicans hate them, then But yeah, not just and not just it's nice to come out to a picket line or something like that, but really engage and figure out, help us strategize, help us come up with ways to really. We have to stop the employer resistance. We have to prevent the threats. Otherwise, we're not going to be successful.
Oh, yeah. And speaking of, earlier you talked about the Signature Theater stagehands. There actually was a submitted question about them, namely, how supportive has Arlington County been for their attempts to organize, and what can we do to help?
Oh, that's another great question. They just recently submitted a petition, and so they came to our Arlington Dems Labor Caucus meeting, and we asked them, what can we do to support and help you? And what we came up with was a letter, as I said, to management, so members of the board, the Arlington County Board, signed that letter, as well as a member of the Arlington County School Board, the Jill Cayazzo, the chair of the Arlington County Democratic Committee, signed on. Mark Levine, Karen Darner, former member of the House of Delegates. So, I think that I feel that our local Dems here in Arlington, are super supportive, and they recognized immediately that the right to organize is a fundamental human right, and our society is it cannot ever be a democratic society if we don't let people who want to have unions have unions. So we're excited about partnering as a community with Signature Theater, with the stagehands, and everyone is an economic crisis. The theater's in crisis. We're going to make it work, and we're going to support them. So yeah, I feel definitely. I hope they know that. I know that Signature Management knows that the entire community is in favor of collective bargaining rights.
Absolutely, and I think our final question. This one was also submitted. NOVA Labor is sponsoring a Zoom call with the Virginia Employment Commission officials to get answers to pressing questions that unemployed workers are asking. What resources and services would you point to those workers who have been furloughed or laid off during this time? Quote unquote.
Well, of course, if you have a union, then the unions are bringing together all the resources we possibly can. We're offering, this is our second question and answer session on unemployment insurance issues. We're advocating for people at the commission, helping individuals with their claims. We're trying to do a food drive, but we're mainly advocating with employers for their rights. So, as far as resources, get in touch. NOVA Labor is a coalition of 70 different unions. We have about 60,000 members, and we welcome all workers. We want to help you organize a union. We want to help you get the support and resources you need. So just get in touch, and we'll try to, connect you with anything that we can do to help. And we want you to be part of our movement.
Absolutely. The labor movement is for all those who work and who are seeking work.
There you go.
Yeah. Well, thank you for coming out. Before you go, I just want to make a plug for I think the Coalition to Repeal Right to Work is having its conference call on Friday at 7, and who's So who's going to be joining us?
We have an amazing show. We have an amazing meeting. It's going to be Bhaskar Sankara, the editor-in-chief of Jacobin Magazine. A very well-known intellectual, left-wing intellectual, and it's going to be a great conversation. And everybody's welcome to join. And anyone that's not on our mailing list for those events, just let Adam and the folks know, and we'll get you on the list. So please join us on Friday evening. We're trying to keep the Coalition to Repeal Right to Work alive by considering big issues about fundamental change, and we all want to work together to do what needs to be done to deal with this horrendous crisis, both of health care and of the economy. So we need to all work together, and thank you again for everything you guys do. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. No, thanks for sitting down with us virtually. Okay, well, thank you again, and we hope everyone has a good night and stay safe and stay healthy.
Take care, everyone.